Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I haven't really seen this particular auditorium this packed. So, once again, thank you very much for being here this evening to grace this occasion. I want to begin by saying that over the last few years, some people have been describing the state of affairs, the economic state of affairs, using some adjectives. Slow down, slide. Some people have even uttered the dreaded recession, R word. Till now, however, the ruling establishment has chosen to dismiss these criticisms in the main, as motivated by the opposition and certain economists of a particular bent of mind which are uncomfortable with the policies and the approach of this government. But today marks a very different day, because someone from within the ruling establishment has used some novel adjectives to describe the state of affairs. One of them is a two-letter word called tailspin. Dr. Subramanian Swamy fleshes out the reasons why he is called the present state of affairs tailspin in this book, Reset. But more than just assessing the problems, Dr. Swamy has called upon his scholarship, which has been, of course, steeled in some of the greatest institutions in the world, and he has brought his wisdom to bear on offering, as he calls it, a reset, or the formula for a reset to regain India's economic legacy. And I want to begin this discussion by touching upon some of the points that Dr. Swamy has made in his very informative book, which is a must-read. Now, I want to begin, Dr. Swamy, not from the extant moment, from a little back in time. In your book, you talk about the 1991 reforms. Yes. And you've taken credit for them. You've said that you were the initiator, you conceived it in '88, and then having helped the Chandrasekhar government and the Narsimha Rao government take it forward and fully implement it at a time when you held a cabinet rank. Now, conventional wisdom, or at least that's the more advertised thesis, is that two other individuals, PV Narsimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh, were the initiators. So tell us a little bit about your contribution first. This is very important.
Well, PV Narsimha Rao was not in the Chandrasekhar government, so the blueprints were really produced during the Chandrasekhar government, when it was adopted by the cabinet on March 11th at 11 a.m. of 1991. And at 4 p.m. the government fell. Not because of my blueprints, but there was a quarrel between Chandrasekhar and Rajiv Gandhi, who was extending support to our government. When Narsimha Rao was invited to form the government, and as the biography of Sitapati says, on the way back from Rashtrapati Bhavan to his Motilal Nehru Marg residence, he stopped by at my place and took me with him to Motilal Nehru Marg. And then he told me that you have produced some blueprints, I want them now. I said, when? He said, tonight. I said, tonight I'll have to dig up for it, but I'll try my best. And I managed to find it. I gave it to him. Then he said I should join his cabinet. I said, I'll be delighted to. But he said, there's a condition, and that is that you must join Congress party. So I said, that I will not do. So he said, why? I said, because you're not the owner of the Congress party, you're just a tenant. and the owner is someone else. So he laughed off and said, all right, in due course, I'll find some other way to bring you in. But Narsimha Rao consulted me throughout. When I was, when Chandrasekhar's government was formed, Chandrasekhar asked me who should be the economic advisor to our government. So I said the best person would be Manmohan Singh. He said, why? I said, he's, first of all, professionally very qualified. And two, he will not talk back to you. So therefore, that is the best kind of expert you can have for your kind of temperament, I said. So he said, get him. So I phoned him up, he was in Geneva, and he agreed to come. He made only one condition, that I should make Manmohan Singh a Secretary of Commerce, of which I was a minister, which I agreed. And I must say that both Manmohan Singh and Manmohan Singh assisted me in a great deal. And so the only credit I can claim is that I initiated it as the political authority to push it. I got it adopted by the cabinet. But the 95% of the credit should go to Narsimha Rao, because he had the nerve and the guts to take it through, explain to his Congress members that he wasn't doing anything extraordinary, and he had a gift of the gab, so he was able to do it. And of course, Manmohan Singh was faithfully executing it, but he was very unhappy because he was attacked in Parliament. I've seen him almost in tears in front of Narsimha Rao, saying that I'm attacked every day. And Narsimha Rao said, blame it on me, that is him. And so Narsimha Rao took the flak, and I think that he suffered it, because after his tenure was over, the Congress party set up an inquiry committee under Anthony, and they found fault with the policies pursued by Narsimha Rao, because Congress party lost the election in 1996 after this huge success in the economy. So short answer to your question is, the major credit should go to Narsimha Rao. For execution, Manmohan Singh and Manmohan Singh. And in terms of conception, I'm responsible.
Well, I'm going to be a little mischievous.
Yes.
There is another man who's also given credit, and that man is currently in jail. Here's what Dr. Manmohan Singh said about the man at an event in August 2013. He said, I, quote, Sri Chidambaram and I were cabinet colleagues in Sri Narsimha Rao's government when I was finance minister, and the reforms of the 1990s were initiated. I recalled that Sri Chidambaram was one of the strongest advocates of economic reforms whenever the program came under attack, both in the union cabinet and also in the wider political arena. Does he deserve any credit, P. Chidambaram?
Well, I know this much, that from the late 70s, the whole of the 80s, and the early 90s, Chidambaram and N. Ram used to edit a magazine called The Radical View.
That I'm aware of.
And they were advocating nothing but nationalization, state control, commanding heights of the. I think Chidambaram saw the trend of the reforms, and then he did a somersault. But he milked the system. If he really had brought about serious economic reforms, nobody can milk the system.
Let me bring in Professor Baru for just a few moments.
Yeah,
and I want to ask you, because in your book, The Accidental Prime Minister, which I've also read, you a lot of praise for Dr. Manmohan Singh and his role in the 1991 reforms, and generally as an economist. Are you fully in concurrence with what Dr. Swamy is saying about his own contribution and the shepherding of the reform process, or the executing of it very diligently by Dr. Manmohan Singh?
Well, you know, I wrote another book, which a gentleman here has just brought, called 1991, How Narsimha Rao Made History. In fact, that book is about 1991. The Accidental Prime Minister is about 2004, 2009. But in my book, which I wrote on the basis of substantial conversations I had with several people, including Mr. Swamy, I make 2 points on this whole issue of the authorship of 1991. One, it is true that the March 91 budget of the Chandrasekhar government had almost everything that was there in the July 1991 budget of Dr. Manmohan Singh. That is on record. In fact, even Yashwant Sinha, who was the finance minister during Chandrasekhar's time, has written a book where he has given details of that. And the program with the fund, which was finally entered into in 91, the negotiations began in December 91. It just so happened that I was in Washington as a journalist of the Economic Times and ran into C. Rangarajan, who was the deputy governor, who was actually in Washington on a secret mission to negotiate the terms of the agreement. So it is true that the Chandrasekhar government began the process and it finally culminated during Mr. Narsimha Rao's time. But the important point that needs to be made, and which Dr. Swamy has repeatedly made even in this book, is that the political leadership that Narsimha Rao gave was an extremely important factor that facilitated the reform.
On the point of political leadership, I want to once again refer to your book, Dr. Swamy. You draw a contrast between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Dr. Manmohan Singh. And while you praise the former, you also add that you have a fundamental problem with the approach adopted by the people he's surrounded by. Would you, first of all, tell me what the issue is? Because most of the people he's been surrounded by are individuals who have come from abroad, have great on-paper qualifications, and have been very effective administrators. So I would like you to first explain what is the issue.
Well, everybody thought that Raghuram Rajan was highly qualified. Yes, he had a PhD from MIT. But he was not an economist. He was a financeman. In economics, the real economics is not microeconomics. That any shopkeeper can tell you. The real economics is macroeconomics. It's a general equilibrium system where if you do something in one sector, it has an effect all through in other sectors. That's why in the Depression, the American president made the mistake of thinking that he could wipe out unemployment by reducing wage rates, by pleading with the trade unions that till the elections are over, his re-election was coming up. And he said, till that time, you accept a 10% cut in your wages. And that 10% cut in wages was followed up by increasing unemployment, because when you cut wages, you also cut purchasing power. And that reduces demand. And therefore, firms which are on the borderline, they start collapsing. And that's how unemployment grows. The same mistake Mr. Raghuram Rajan made, saying that I have to raise interest rates to control inflation. But when you raise interest rates, then the cost of capital for medium and small and medium industries rises, and all of them are on the borderline, and they collapse one after the other. And that is what today's high employment is due to. So all these people who Narendra Modi's government selected had no clue about macroeconomics.
Would you name some of them?
Well, Arvind Subramanian, then of course I already named Raghuram Rajan. The finance minister, Mr. Jaitley, didn't know ABC of economics, and that problem is continuing.
What is the problem with the current finance minister?
Well, I mean, she's hardly been there, but her approach is now quite clear. It's not a macro approach. And this sudden wiping out of taxes of what, 2.4 crores, lakh crores or something? 1.4 lakh crores. I mean, it's not part of any package. And that means you have no understanding what the real problem is. The real problem is that demand is low. So if you give corporates more money, they can only increase supply. But the demand, the real thing where she should have done it is abolish income tax. That would have raised the demand.
Which is one of his prescriptions. We'll come to that in just a few moments. I just want to read a little bit about what you have said about the current Prime Minister, and this is important. He says, He has immense appeal with the masses and hard-working middle classes, and thus the mandate to carry out major reforms. He's honest in money matters. Lack of academic background has made him dependent on his friends and chosen ruthless ministers who never tell him the bitter truth about the economy or explain the macroeconomics, or that he needs to figure the way out of a crisis. Hence, we have witnessed the folly of demonetization and the inanity of the goods and services tax, both of which have accelerated the tailspin of the economy. So this is the new word that you brought in, and you elaborate on why you called it a tailspin, also in the book. But as the Prime Minister, he's a domineering figure who brooks no political competition. His reliance on unelectable political advisors and colleagues for clues on complex subject of the economy, which they know little about, or even lettered but timid economists appointed by him to posts of huge perks, results in them telling the Prime Minister only that he wants to hear. This is a frightening potpourri for the nation. Now, political leadership is very important. Can you absolve Narendra Modi here? Fine, he has the wrong people. But then if things are not working, he needs to react.
Well, I'll give you the answer first as a politician, then as an economist. As an economist, I have nothing but admiration. He keeps winning elections, and that's what we want.
As a politician.
As a politician, yes. Sorry.
Someone would say now that politics is also a numbers game. So maybe economy comes in there too. You have to do back of the
economy will come in when firms start collapsing, banks starts closing, and factories, start slashing heavily on employment. That stage is at least a few months away if the present trends continue. But he has a rapport with the public, and the public still has a lot of faith in him. His inability the culture which he has demonstrated already in Gujarat and today in the last 5.5 years or thereabouts, shows that in the cabinet there is no discussion. It's mostly a kind of a roll call. So how can you blame him in one sense, because nobody is telling him what he needs to know? Take, for instance, demonetization. Actually, in 2014, just over end of 2013 and towards 2014, it was Narendra Modi who told the then president of the party, Gadkari, that you appoint Swamy as a chairman of Strategic Action Committee to tell us what are the things we need to do for once we come to power. And demonetization was recommended by me. But I made conditions that you will have in your stock 6 times the 100 rupee notes that you have today, in new 100 rupee notes. 2, that you will, if you are bringing high denomination notes, new notes, then make sure that the ATMs are designed for that size, or that you repeat the same size, but you have a new note. And 3rd is, tell people that you can deposit your cash in your own bank account. Government will ask no questions, and take away 15% as tax. And you can withdraw 25% of new cash for you, and the rest will be 60% will be in fixed deposit for 5 years.
Yes.
I said there will be no queue. I had said in that time itself there will be no queues, nothing. Now, the finance ministry didn't tell him, the Reserve Bank didn't tell him that they have not printed new notes of the size we want. Then there was no way except to go to banks and stand in a queue and change your cash. And finally, Sri Ravi Shankar asked me, can you give a suggestion in December? And I gave the same suggestion, that you ask people to stop going to banks and deposit in their own account. But it went to the finance ministry, and the finance ministry said government should take 50% of the cash that you give as tax. Now, why would anybody go for that? Because the bank employees were coming privately, informally, and saying, you give us 15%, and we'll give you cash delivered at home, you don't have to come.
So it became a scam.
So yeah, it was a
That's what
scam,
you
but
mentioned.
then this was unimplementable. So these are the things where the details of what needs to be done, he's not familiar with because he's not trained for that.
But Dr. Swamy, in your book, while you are criticizing demonetization and holding it to account for a lot of ills, you in a speech did say that 50% of its objectives had been accomplished.
Yes.
That was, I think, in Seoul, I think when
Yes.
you were in South Korea.
Yeah.
Did you jump the gun, or did you think the intent was right, or did you at that time not know that the implementation was as awry as it
No,
turned out to be?
I had said whenever you take a measure, 50% is the shock value. And that shock value was achieved. But the remaining 50%...
You said terror was down. You said...
Yes, that's right. Terror financing had come down very substantially. And in the beginning, the counterfeit notes out of fright was not coming out. But later on, it also came and got recycled through the Reserve Bank and became new legal Indian notes. That's why they're not declaring how much money has been collected.
Let me bring in Dr. M.R. Venkatesh also. Dr. M.R. Venkatesh, many people trace back the problems that we are facing today to the overhang of demo. How much culpability should one, at some level, put place upon the government for this decision? Do you believe it was as much a problem as Dr. Swamy has made it out to be?
What unites me with Dr. Baru is that both of us wrote a book on Dr. Manmohan Singh, where he was charitable and he said accidental prime minister, and I said it was a decade of decay when Dr. Manmohan Singh was at the helm of affairs, and I had the pleasure of Dr. Swamy releasing that book to a very tumultuous audience in Chennai. I believe that the current problem has a lot of its roots in the year 2008 to 2014, when 2G started and goes on to devastate a lot of whatever corporate ethics we had. And we became a literal la-la land, where telephone banking in the true sense of the word was flourishing between 2009 and 2012. And you will see the type of corporates, and there is a Credit Suisse report I'm sure all of us who have been in economics, been monitoring, has warned that 10 groups, the biggest 10 groups, barring the Tatas and the Dhirubhai Ambani group, had not got enough profit after operations to pay its interest. So this cycle starts somewhere in the year 2013. But you know what? But this did not hit the small and medium enterprises. And as Dr. Subramanian Swamy says, demo was the proverbial last straw on the camel's back, that an economy which was already floundering could not absorb the shock of demonetization to the extent that it should have been actually revitalizing the economy. And to somebody who practices on the economic criminal law, I know that many of those cases which started with great fervor on black money and on enforcement directorate and Benami law have really not seen the light of the day. At least the public would be happy that I deposited my cash standing 4 hours in the queue, but to see one scoundrel going to jail. But that also has not happened in the true sense. That was one of the avowed objectives of demonetization, which probably you can't blame, even I would say that you can't blame the minister or the Prime Minister. But CBDT and CBIC have a lot of answering to do, that they had the whole data coming out. And if you look at what Mr. Jaitley's budget of 2016 says, he says in one paragraph that I have got roughly 1.45 lakh people depositing somewhere around 5 lakh crores. That's just 1.45 lakh people depositing 5 lakh crores.
Okay.
But what has happened to that? Now we are in 2019. Nothing has happened. So there's a huge amount of bureaucracy which has also acted to ensure that the idea of neutralization, demonetization was neutralized. Let us be very clear about and candid about that.
Okay, so while the intent might have been right, varied factors have led to its failure, which you have explored in your book. But I want to bring in Dr. Baru. Dr. Baru, one of the suggestions, and I'm tying this now with the present situation, that Dr. Subramanian Swamy vociferously argues for is the abolition of income tax. Now, we have seen cuts in the corporate tax announced last week. It has led to some revival of sentiment, at least as far as the markets are concerned. Are you in favor of a very liberal tax regime?
No, I'm certainly in favor of a liberal tax regime, but not the abolition of income tax. I don't agree with Dr. Swamy on that. We are a highly unequal society, and there has to be some fiscal measure by which those who are better off will pay for the welfare of those who are not better off. And a progressive income tax in all modern societies is the basis of such transfer of money, also of citizenship. There is a famous statement, early years of democracy, there's no taxation without representation. But once there is representation, taxation is a way in which citizenship, you play a certain obligation.
Sure, one understands that, but distribution of wealth, Dr. Swamy has perhaps presaged that someone would make this point, and he argues, why don't you explain to the audience here, Dr. Swamy, why you don't believe that that is the only way of redistributing income?
See, first of all, income tax is not paid on agricultural income, zero.
Yeah, so pay it.
No. First, let me tell you the actual situation. Income tax is not paid agriculture. Those below the tax limit, they don't pay taxes. The rich have chartered accountants. And they will put expenses, exemptions, etc. And in the end, they will hardly pay anything. And if the income tax collector becomes unreasonable, then he's also paid. It's the most corrupt system we have today, the income tax collection system. So it's the middle class, the young entrepreneurs who come with startups and so on, who are harassed. Today, people are shivering that some notice will arrive, and then they will face a hardship. When you can raise money by auctioning 2G spectrum or coal blocks, and you get in lakh crores, what is the difficulty? Today, if you abolish income tax, first of all, the rate of savings will go up. As a consequence, the rate of investment will go up, and that, as a consequence of which the growth rate will go up. And black money, which is mostly going into consumption, because otherwise it will be discovered, that will cease to be. So the goal for which Sanjay Baru is arguing about egalitarianism, that in the present Indian system is not possible through official channels. And I think that's why the Hindus had always said that the highest respect should be given to the poorest but knowledgeable person. The Jnani and Tyagi was placed at the head of the hierarchy. And we are probably the only society where money is not a determinant of your social status, whereas in the United States it is. So I would therefore like to have a system which can be implemented.
Sure.
And not a system which is unimplementable.
Okay,
sure.
Dr. Baru.
But that's fine. It's a system that can be implemented, non-corrupt, agricultural income should be taxed, and remove all these various ways of tax avoidance,
Sure.
etc. But the principle of taxation, I'm willing to accept a lower rate of taxation. But the principle of taxation goes back to Kautilya's Arthashastra. Forget about Keynes and modern economics.
That was Satya Yuga, not Kali
But
Yuga.
the point is, the idea that it's a responsibility of the state to transfer, to collect income from those who can afford and provide facilities, infrastructure or services, education, health, etc. for those who cannot afford, is one of the fundamental foundations of liberalism. So I find it very difficult to accept the idea of abolition of income tax.
Okay, Doctor.
See, being a chartered accountant, so I think let me have a say on this. There is no tax terrorism in this country. There's only pure unadulterated tax jihadism. Okay. Now, why do I say this? Today, it's not a question of paying income tax, sir. I am ready to pay 60% also. But the laws are so complicated that I tweeted that whether the finance secretary or the CBDT chairman, but they must sit in presence of the Prime Minister and fill their income tax form. Let CBIC chairman come and fill GST 9. Okay. Sir, Tom Cruise is taking a new film, Mission Impossible, based on this idea. That's all I wanted to say.
But given, and I want to explore this just for a few more moments, given the fact that this government hasn't really lived up to its own promise of minimum government, maximum governance, it has extended welfareism even beyond the scope of what the UPA had envisaged. Is this even something that the regime that you're part of, Dr. Swamy, is even willing to contemplate? Such radical thoughts on the tax issue.
Well, there has to be somebody who's to campaign for it. And I don't think anybody wants to do it. And there are elements in our party and even government to think that these instruments are necessary to keep people in discipline. I mean, keeping them in line. I'm using the word discipline and not in a positive sense. It's impossible, in my opinion, today to be rich and not violate the laws. The laws are so complicated. The income tax officials and the...
No, so some people here will say that what you're doing now is creating a justification for the Malyas and others that you have actually gone against. Because they've been forced to perhaps do things.
No. See, the question is, they have not, it's not a question of violation of income tax on their part. They have taken money from the banks and decamped. It's a totally different thing. I would say that I'm only talking about the personal income tax.
Okay.
And make it equitous. You can't collect, if tomorrow you have an agriculture income tax, I can tell you all the farmers will beat up the income tax people and nobody will come back alive. So therefore there is no income tax for agriculture. The same thing might happen in the urban sector very soon at the rate which we are going.
Let's talk about this word tailspin that you have referred to.
Yes.
Tell us why we are in this position.
Well, we are in this position because we have not allowed the people of India to venture to take new projects. That is, I'm talking about in entrepreneurs. Take new projects and not pay some kind of tax all the way. And the moment we have tried something alternative, we have ended up doing something much worse, like the GST. It was originally an idea that you pay tax at only one place, the place of final sale.
Yeah.
But then the question became, what about the place of production? So we have to compensate for that. So therefore, we have to have the state not collect income indirect tax, but the center. So we brought a constitutional amendment for it. And then what do you do with the money? You put it first in a bank, and then after that you have a computer program through which you decide which state and which state should get how much of the share of the money that you have collected in aggregate. For that, you need a giant software program. And that was entrusted to a private company. It was called GSTN. And you would be surprised that the entire parliament voted for GSTN except one person, namely myself. And I said, this GSTN should be nationalized. You can't have ICICI and HDFC in that having a majority share and the government having a minority share in collection of taxes. It's unheard of. Finally, 6 months ago, the Prime Minister agreed and he has nationalized GSTN. Today, everybody, as he says, the forms that they have to fill, it is horrendous. I had one person come from Barmer, Rajasthan, telling me, I've been asked to upload. Ye kya hota hai upload? He says, I don't understand. So I said, you put a computer and then he says, wahan to bijli bhi nahi hai, main kahan computer chalaunga. So see, there's been total lack of thinking on this. This is the problem that has, Prime Minister has a lot of ideas, but he should not be encouraged to implement all of them at one stroke. And there are people who are not being fair to him by telling him it can be done. And then later on, let him hold the bag.
Have you ever had exchanges with the Prime Minister over the last few years? I'm sure you've been thinking about these thoughts.
I write Prime Minister's letters on all this, and he responds by just acknowledging my letter. I've known him from 1972, and I know there is no point a person like me talking to him on a technical subject. He feels offended, understandably, because he thinks that I am trying to, since my talk will not be, sir, you're a wonderful man, you're doing extremely well. I know him so well that I would talk to him on a personal basis.
One of the issues that you also point to is the lack of verifiable data, accurate, authentic data.
Yes.
Now, I want to bring in Dr. Baru on this. Dr. Baru,
I have an anecdote on that after that.
Okay, I just want to read out a little bit of an excerpt from the book. The Finance Ministry has been caught in embarrassing controversy on the veracity of government statistics. It does look like a wild hope that the GDP in mid-2024 will be 5 trillion from the estimated 2.7 trillion in mid-2019 at constant price. It means a 14.4% growth rate annually. And we know that GDP growth rate figures have attracted a lot of controversy. Is this also a fundamental problem? Do you believe that there is fudgery?
You see, I don't want to get into this debate on GDP numbers. It's basically economists who get obsessed with these numbers. There's a larger issue, since it's a general audience we are talking to, there's a larger issue of trust in the government. The fact is that Indian statistics have always been flawed. I don't think anybody will ever say that there was some point in time in the past when the statistics were all 100% accurate.
Sure.
There's a lot of in the manner in which we gather these statistics, there's shadow pricing, there are extrapolations, interpolations, assumptions made, agricultural statistics, employment statistics. Anybody who knows anything about Indian statistics know that these are approximations. But the point is, people trusted these numbers, not just in India, but internationally, that India was never seen as a country that generated false data, like China was. I mean, Chinese statistics were always questioned whether these were accurate or not, whether this was being fudged. I think for the first time we've had, in the last several years, questions about the accuracy of the data. I don't think there's any need for a government that has absolute majority in parliament to be defensive about what it does. An assertion of confidence, yes, there's a mistake. We understand there's a mistake, we will sort out the mistake. Instead of saying, no, there's no mistake, and anybody who says there's a mistake is anti-national, I don't accept.
Okay. Dr. Swamy, you wanted to come in with an anecdote?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is not a question of fudging data. It's a question of the conceptual change which is not disclosed. One of the things that happened after we came to power is we shifted the price base from 2004 to 2012.
12. Yeah.
Now, it's well known in the theory of index numbers, and I'm joint author with Paul Samuelson on the most classic paper on index number theory. I can tell you, the simplest thing is that when you change the base from an earlier year to a later year, all estimates start going up. So there is no fudging, but if the country doesn't know that you have changed the base, you're misleading them. This is one. Second, on February 1, 2017, the BJP government decided to introduce the budget on the 1st of February. So they have to bring an economic survey. So an economic survey was brought, which said there is no impact of demonetization on the Indian economy. Coincidentally, the Minister of Planning, Mr. Sadanand Gowda, a good friend of mine, he was Minister of Planning for Minister of Statistics also. And he knew as much statistics as he knew about how to dance Bharatnatyam, that kind of difference. So he requested me to be present in a meeting with their Central Statistical Organization director about the evaluation of GDP. So first question I asked, and by the way, the Central Statistical Organization was founded by my father. And early years, I had as a boy of 7 or 8 years old, I used to spend hours there because my father used to take me there and keep me there. But I asked the director, you have on the 1st of February produced an economic survey which shows that the GDP is higher than, there has been no decline and therefore there's no impact of it. Tell me one thing, the informal sector, like small and medium industries,
Yes.
their estimates come out of an annual survey of the National Sample Survey. And you have produced, the demonetization was in November of 2016.
16.
And you produced an estimate on 1st of February in 2017. And you said there's no impact. So I want to ask you, if you produced a thick volume on 1st of February, you must have sent it to the printer on 1st of January. And that means you must have had your paper, the volume written up somewhere in the middle of December. So how could you get an estimate of the impact of demonetization on the economy? So he said, I was under pressure to produce these statistics. So what I did is, I took the 2015 ratio between the informal sector and the formal sector and applied the same ratio to the formal sector in 2016. And that's how I got it. So I said, but that whole thing assumes that there is no change in the informal sector. He said, yes. Then I said, but aren't you misleading the public? He said, I was required to do a job, I did it. So now this is the real question. It's the conceptual changes that have taken place. There's no fudging of data. The conceptual change should be, take again last $5 trillion in 2024.
Yes.
2024, yes. That means, what was it on 5th of May, 5th of May of 2019? It was 2.5 trillion.
Yes.
So that means doubling in 5 years. If you double in 5 years, it is actually a growth rate of 14.4% per year. We are growing now at less than 6%. Can you assume that you will make up enough so that the average for the 5 years will be 14.4% per year? So I was quietly told that the 5 trillion is in current prices. Now that means it includes inflation. So this is again not fudging, but not being told whether it's constant prices, current prices. People don't understand. So nobody asks these questions.
Okay. I just want to ask you finally, Dr. Swamy, you've written all of this, you've put it into a book which I'm sure that a large number of people here should and would look forward to read. But have you ever had exchanges with the Prime Minister over the last few years? I'm sure you've been thinking about these thoughts. Have you been able to present them?
I write Prime Minister's letters on all this. On GSTN, I wrote letters, 4 or 5, and he responds by just acknowledging my letter. But I have never taken the trouble to go and take appointment with him and meet him, because I've known him from 1972, and I know there is no point a person like me talking to him on a technical subject. He feels offended, understandably, because he thinks that I am trying to, since my talk will not be, sir, you're a wonderful man, you're doing extremely well. I know him so well that I would talk to him on a first-name basis. So I have written letters continuously.
Well, now you have a reason.
And now I can send him a book.
Now you have a reason. You should,
I'll send him a book.
you should give it to him personally.
Yes.
Well,
I'm waiting for him to come back.
well, there you go. He doesn't mince his words, and he certainly hasn't minced them here. We leave it at that.